If you're an American conservative, you know that the societal values we hold sacred are under attack. They are hanging in the balance. How can you protect those values? By staying informed. The Closing Argument will deliver news and supporting evidence you need to support and defend those values. Here's Paul Smith.
Good morning. This is Paul Smith, your host of The Closing Argument. In this podcast, we discuss some of the important but controversial moral, political, and legal issues that affect us and our families today. Some of the things we discuss are not politically correct, and I recognize that this may offend some of my listeners, but they need to be discussed anyway. We need to know the truth about certain things, and we need to preserve our liberties. And the world needs to know that there are a lot of us who challenge some of the views that are gaining acceptance in our schools, in our media, and in the government, but which are not right. And we need to speak up and make sure that to the best we can establish truth. Now, I have with me today for my guest, Jeff Holtzinger. We're going to talk about some climate change issues. How are you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Great. So this is the third of our podcasts that deal with some of the science on climate change. And in our prior discussions, we talked about global warming a little bit. We talked about CO2. Today, we're going to talk about some other aspects of climate change and some of the supposed effects, which really are disputed and may not be actually accurate. Again, the importance of this today is that we're recording this is March 7th, 2022. We're in about the 12th day of fighting in the Ukraine. That has not been resolved. And one of the issues here, the United States continues to import a lot of oil from Russia, who we're trying to prevent from, taking over the Ukraine. We're not stopping that. And we're not increasing our own oil production. And the reason for this is this fastidious, irrational belief that we're destroying the climate. And I don't think we are. So it certainly is something that is disputed by thousands of scientists. So we're going to discuss some of this today. That's why this discussion is important. There's a list of about 7 different supposed causes of climate change, and I want to talk about some of them right now. One of them is that climate change has caused an increase in extreme weather events such as hurricanes and tornadoes. Have you heard about that?
Yes, I've heard people make that argument, but I don't think they go back and far enough and look at some of the cycles we've had in the past as well.
Well, that's what some of the scientists say, exactly what you're saying, that a correct look at the frequency and intensity of hurricanes and tornadoes shows that there is no increase in these in recent years. So again, I'm not the scientist. I don't know, but I'm telling you what some of the scientists have said. And the conclusion that these things are happening is certainly disputed by many of the top scientists. I wrote the book, The Climate Change Hoax Argument, and you can go to my website, www.cpaulsmith.com. You can order a copy of it. It's not a long book. It's 116 pages, but it summarizes the main points in this debate, and it indicates the scientists, and many of them are the world's top scientists who dispute this catastrophic climate change scenario. Now, another of the things that are happening that are blamed on climate change are the frequency of wildfires. In fact, I remember when Trump was president, I think in his last year, 2020, they had a lot of wildfires in California, and some people blame Trump on this because he did not embrace the climate change hysteria. That
in actuality, probably the severity of it was probably due to poor land management practices by the state of California, by not cleaning up litter, by not allowing logging in some cases. We had a lot of older dead standing. And I think a lot of it by not allowing clearing along transmission lines, be it natural gas or electric, where if you've had an incident, and then by not allowing the clearing, supposedly for environmental reasons, you've allowed an incident that may have been a typical maintenance incident in a electric power grid, for instance, to expand into a huge forest fire because they had too much litter near the power lines, and the power companies were not permitted to keep those corridors clear of this type of thing that allowed the forest fire to basically get as big as they were, expand that rapidly.
Well, two other aspects of it too are if you look at any particular fire to prove who caused it. I mean, what if somebody threw a cigarette out, it ignited the grass that caused the fire? Are you going to blame this on climate change?
Right.
I mean, that's kind of hard to do. And another aspect of it is some of the fires are cause more damage because of the development that has occurred, so that the fire that might have just destroyed a field 50 years ago now destroys a community. So the damage is greater, but the fact that the monetary damage is greater does not necessarily mean that any change in climate is causing it.
So again, to your point, that there's a lot of factors that they just make a conclusion based on a very limited set of factors, and they don't really look at all the different factors and considerations they should before they make such a conclusion.
So I've got scientists named Barry and some others that I mentioned in my book that dispute that this is happening. Another said cause or effect from climate change is said to be sea rising. Now, the main cause is, people will say, is that global warming is causing the seas to rise at an unprecedented rate. And I think Al Gore in his book, The Inconvenient Truth, talks about, I think it was 20 feet that he thought it was going to rise in about 100 years. There is no scientific support for that. And actually the scientists dispute that the warming that is occurring is increasing the rate at which the seas are rising. So this was interesting to me. The scientists I read indicated the sea has been rising at a slow rate beginning about 15,000 years ago, and has only been rising slightly faster during the last 5,000 years. During the last 100 years, there has been a slight decrease in the rate of sea rise, according to IDSO. And so he finds and there have been increases in CO2. So these scientists dispute that CO2 increases are causing the sea rise.
I think Mr. Gore is not looking at the inconvenient facts.
Yeah, exactly. The ice melt is said to have been causing sea rise, but actually this doesn't even make sense, as Wrightstone pointed out, because ice in the water, when it melts, occupies less space. So the melting of ice in the water, it's only snow and ice that melt from the land that can cause sea rise. And it's been pointed out, this was IDSO and some others, that actually in Antarctica, it is gaining ice mass, while apparently there's some decrease in ice mass in the Arctic area. So my point, again, I am not the expert, but it's interesting to read some scientists who dispute the rising of the seas. Yes, they continue to rise in every 100 years, but there's not a drastic increase, and certainly the 20-foot rise that Mr. Gore mentioned is just totally unsupported by science. Another cause or effect of climate change is said to be acidic oceans, that increased CO2 causes the oceans to be acidic. And I'm not an expert in that, but I read Dr. Spencer, who specifically says, no, the studies refute that assertion. The EPA, by the way, if you remember a program ago, it alleged that the increases in CO2 in the climate were causing acidic oceans. Another one is the population of polar bears. It is said that they're decreasing. The facts are that, according to Bunker, that the polar population is actually growing. So whether or not you believe me, the point is some of the scientists dispute this. To say that the science is settled is clearly not correct. And before we spend a lot of wasteful money on projects that are not going to cause any change, let's get the science right. One of the other, maybe the primary factor affecting global temperatures is the sun, believe it or not. And it's more than, there's more to the sun's impact than just the warmth you feel. Dr. Idso says that there's a significant correlation between climate patterning and solar activity. And he points out that there are sun's rays, there are sun's magnetic fields, there are solar winds and other solar cycles that have a major impact on global temperatures. For example, it takes the sun rotates in 25 days around its equator, but around its poles, it rotates in 35 days. Did you know that? I didn't either. And of course, it's not a solid mass, so that would explain the difference. But you have sunspots and different things there that can cause temperature changes on the Earth. The point is, and then again, I mentioned the magnetic fields, but this has an effect on the Earth. So the point is that some of the scientists have said that the IPCC has not properly included these variables in its projections. The IPCC makes projections of what they think is going to happen with world temperatures. Although it's apparently difficult, it's hard to predict what these changes will be, but they are the main driver of the temperature on the Earth. And I want to talk about cloud cover. Cloudiness, of course, cools the Earth. And one of the scientists on this, Dr. Spencer, says that a change in cloud cover in the last 100 years is responsible for 75% of the warming trend. He said many of the world temperature variations are caused by changes in the Pacific decadal oscillation, and that he found that these changes were not regarded by the IPCC in its models. Even President Obama's climate czar, a man named John Holdren, said this, quote, an almost imperceptible change in cloudiness, say 1%, could account for the entire warming since the late 19th century. So, and another Dr. Gavin Schmidt, director of the Goddard Institute for Space Studies, said in 2010 that clouds contribute more to the greenhouse effect than CO2. So the point is, cloud cover can have a major effect, but they say the IPCC does not include cloud effects in its models, according to Dr. Spencer. All right, so these are some significant factors. There's another one, aerosols. You know what aerosols are. Now, I'm not talking about just hairspray and spray paint. Aerosols are the minuscule solid matter, it could be liquid, such as smoke particles from fires or ash from volcanoes or ocean spray or even wind-blown sand and soil that are everywhere in the air. They have a major effect on the climate, and only about 4% of them originate from humans. The rest occur naturally. So water condenses around these minuscule particles, which form clouds. Without the aerosol particles, there would be no clouds. And most aerosols reflect the sun's energy back into space and therefore are coolants. So it's interesting just to address these for a minute, because when you look at the smokestack and you think, oh, you're burning something, you're getting not only the CO2, but maybe other ash particles. I don't like them in my atmosphere, but actually they would serve more as a coolant than a warming. And so the point is that the aerosols need to be contributed in climate studies. And